Welcome back to the road to Montebourg for the 14th mission of the campaign. We've done a bit of time travel here and gone back to the afternoon after the 325th Glide Infantry has successfully, if painfully, stormed the German defences in Hell in the Hedgerows. Further up the right of the American line, we're now rejoining 2nd Battalion, 8th Infantry. The 8th Infantry Regiment kicked off the morning with 1st Battalion attacking up Highway N13 and 3rd Battalion attacking the airship hangar on the boundary between the 8th Infantry and the 325th GIR areas. Both of these attacks have stalled, and the regimental commander has pushed 2nd Battalion forward in between them to seize the village of Ecausseville, thereby forcing the German defenders to react and hopefully take some pressure off the other battalions. It's 14:25 by the time that Easy Company is approaching the village, which means at least the morning's rain has stopped, and to quote the briefing, patrols earlier in the morning reported that Ecausseville was free of enemy units. Without knowing the whole picture, it's impossible to know why 8th Infantry didn't attempt to exploit this apparent gap in the enemy line earlier. But even though the information is at least 2.5 hours old, the briefing goes on to reassure me that any enemy force in the village is likely to be very small. So small, in fact, that clearing the village is worth 250 victory points and destroying the enemy only 150. This is a company attack. I'm starting off with the 1st and 2nd platoons of Easy Company, who are backed up by a heavy and medium machine gun team respectively. After 5 minutes, I'll be getting the company HQ and an 81mm mortar team, and at approximately, meaning probably sometime after 5 minutes, I'll be getting the 3rd and 4th platoons. 4th platoon is going to be the important one here. It's the weapons platoon with the 60mm mortars, and they are probably going to be key in snuffing out any pesky German positions that I can't quickly flank. Finally, a 2-tube section of the battalion's 81mm mortars will be on call approximately 25 minutes in. This reinforcement schedule means that I'm going to be somewhat restricted in what I can and can't do by the clock and the terrain. We're in some pretty open farmland here, on one side of a shallow valley in the opposite corner of the map from Ecausseville itself. The small stream running down the valley bottom is the same stream as the one back in Hell in the Hedgerows, and in a similar fashion to that map, the main obstacle here is all this open ground. There are 3 main approaches to the village, diagonally straight across all the open fields, going right and attacking directly across the valley, or going left, hooking through this wood and orchard, attacking the village proper via the Ferme de Chateau and D150 marks. Of these, the central approach is by far the riskiest, but it's also probably the fastest, and with, apparently, only a small German force to deal with, it might not be as dumb an option as it seems if resistance is light. Going left and rolling up any defence along the opposite valley side from there is appealing, but also probably the slowest, based purely on the terrain, never mind any enemy action. Finally, attacking via the right probably balances speed and risk better than the other two, but some of the bocage could be problematic. I don't have any engineers or breach teams attached to blow my way through where I like, and the approach is not only essentially a frontal assault, but would be very vulnerable to flanking fire from likely enemy positions in the orchard on the left. So far in this campaign, in fact in a lot of my videos, I've been doing a lot of command push, where I'm orienting my plan on the terrain. So I'm looking at the ground, deciding where I want to go, and then sending the pixel truppen that way. Here, for a change if nothing else, I'm going to try some reconnaissance pull, sending the recon screen out, finding the enemy, and maintaining enough flexibility to choose where I want to focus based on where the Germans are or aren't, or where they're weakest. Or in other words, instead of deciding in advance where I want to go and then bullying my way through, I'm going to scout everywhere and reinforce either the safest directions or where I make the most progress. It's a somewhat subtle difference, and on small maps like these, there's a lot of crossover between the two approaches, simply because the limited space reduces the number of positions the enemy could be in anyway. But let's give it a go and see how it pans out. The first thing that happens when I push a scout team up the lane from my deployment zone is I lose a pixel truppen to a burst of MG42 fire. So that's a great start. Now I know not to send anybody that way. Luckily there are some gaps in the bocage on my right, so I can avoid using the lane and feed my force onto the right flank through the fields. And because the enemy fire came through a pretty narrow keyhole, this gate, I can immediately pin the enemy machine gun's location down to the wood on the left. I don't have an exact location yet, but I've got something, and lining the lane generates 2 solid spots by the 5-minute mark, an MG42 tripod mounted on the right of the woods, and one in the LMG role on the left. These have been engaging my scout team pushing down the left map edge. Obviously this hasn't been great fun for them, but it has given me time to get set up on the bocage line and given me some targets. Only a turn later, my options have expanded, with all of my reinforcements showing up at about the same time. This is much better than the Stuarts back at Laham, and now I can commit pretty quickly once I decide where I want to go. Expanding to the right and moving some scouts along the lane draws fire which appears to come from the white building looking across the valley, and a little later the team leader of the M1919 goes down to a single well-aimed rifle shot that looks like it came from the left edge of the village. So there's definitely an enemy presence over in Ecausseville itself. This isn't unexpected. It will be a very weird scenario that doesn't have enemy troops in the objective area, but it does render an attack over the right flank pretty unpalatable at this stage. I don't know what I'm dealing with there yet. Meanwhile, I've been spraying the left-hand woods with machine gun fire for a few turns now, and I'm not getting anything back from the MG42s. There have been a few mortar bombs dropping on the left near my scouts, but they haven't gotten on target yet. So I've identified 2 enemy positions here. Both are of unconfirmed strength, but one of them isn't shooting back very effectively anymore. So what I'm going to do is probe the weaker of the 2 and send some scouts down to cross the stream and recce the woods. They get down to the stream itself before getting noticed, and one of them catches a burst of submachine gun fire from a German HQ team in the woods, but I've got loads of fire support on hand to shut that new spot down, and soon the lone survivor is up in position. From there, it seems like he can hear the enemy falling back through the wood. This definitely seems where I want to go then, and soon I have a squad filtering across the fields to the scout's position. The first team that gets there moves up to the bocage behind the woods, where it immediately gets into a close-range firefight with a mob of enemy pixel truppen. It looks like all the enemy troops have fallen back into the farmyard, and while my GIs are able to get the lead out and do some damage, they're outnumbered, and after only a few seconds, the first round of this fight ends indecisively. It's not going to be indecisive very long though, and when my squad's A team gets stuck in with fresh bodies and a Thompson submachine gun, the tables turn on the Germans and they're unceremoniously mopped up in short order. It looks like I've managed to land a solid punch on the left, and now I can start to follow up and exploit. My experience on the right while all this is going on reinforces this idea. The contact on the edge of the village has resolved into a sniper team, and while I'm pretty sure the contact in the White House is an MG42 in the HMG role, I haven't been able to get a solid spot yet. Not knowing exactly which floor and section of the house to shoot up obviously makes it pretty difficult to suppress that machine gun effectively, but the sniper team isn't very receptive to suppressive fire either. It's not until they've had a couple of 60mm mortar bombs land on them that they get the hint, and pushing a scout team into the open field on the far right finally nets a spot on the White House MG. It's not a huge amount of progress, and with plenty more potential enemy positions in the buildings up there and lots of open ground to cross, I'm still definitely favouring the left. This does not mean that things are going well over there. I might have wiped out the German troops who had fled the woods, but with no gaps on this side I can't bypass it. The first team to enter via the single gap in the front blunders into the HMG team that nailed my scout back on turn 1. Things rapidly disintegrate with lots of short-range rifle fire and hand grenades going everywhere. My team breaks and runs, but either the gap charging bug worked in my favour, or the pixel truppen wanted instant revenge because they immediately counter-assault. The survivors nading the HMG team and charging up the hedgerow on the outside of the wood to get stuck in on the flank at close range. My second team into the woods, who were following quite closely and got in there before the turn ended and I could stop them, ran afoul of a German HQ team, losing 2 men to MP45 before panicking all the way through to the farmyard. It's not great, and if I'd been moving more carefully here I might not have rushed into this, but after a few turns I'm able to bring more forces to bear and snuff out the 2 enemy teams, finally opening up the left flank. By now we've hit the 30-minute mark, so only 20 more minutes to go, and I'm starting to filter more troops down the left, across the stream and through the wood, where the squads of my lead platoon are pushing across the orchard by the Ferme de Chateau without encountering resistance. A new enemy contacting the church, firing across the valley at my forces on the right, gets a nasty surprise when bazooka rockets start hitting the front of the building, and soon it seems that even the White House MG has finally given in to the pressure of all the fire I'm directing at it and stopped shooting. Pushing more troops down the far right field to see if I can exploit here too shows that it's still not out of the fight, and rinsing the front of the building with 2 squads worth of M1 Garons seems to work for a while. At the 90-degree angle, it looks like more rounds are penetrating the building as opposed to the more oblique fire coming from my machine guns further down my left, but that MG42 still refuses to either die or run away. With a barrage from the off-map 81s falling way off target in the fields by the stream, and not on the White House where I intended them to fall, it looks like it's ultimately up to my left flank to finish the deal. I still have plenty of time, and with 2 platoons providing a base of fire from the orchard and advancing by the unoccupied Ferme de Chateau, supported by the mortars, machine guns and final rifle platoon strung along the lane back across the valley, it's only a matter of time. There's a sharp little firefight in the woods next to the village, with more hand grenades being thrown, but I have the numbers and firepower to overcome the enemy. Clearing those woods lets me wipe out an enemy team in the house across the road, and with mortars raining down on the objective area, the German survivors throw in the towel and surrender. Once again, that makes it a total victory. I've lost out on the bonus points for keeping my casualties down. I lost 12 dead and 8 wounded, mostly in the woods on either flank, where the concealment and short ranges mean that casualties are pretty likely. It's very possible though that I could have avoided casualties in the left-hand woods by stacking the front hedgerow and having a look inside before I went in, but having done that on the left side of the woods and taken out a large number of enemy pixel shot and milling around behind them, it did feel like it was pretty clear and I wanted to keep the speed up. The Germans have obviously suffered enough to make them want to surrender, with 23 men dead, 16 wounded, 1 man taken prisoner and only 8 still kicking. Despite my best efforts, the MG42 in the White House is still going at the end, though at least I have the satisfaction of the team being mostly piled up behind the gun and the lone wounded survivor unlikely to have lived much longer, with a GI scout team closing in on him from the flank. Historically, the Americans apparently had a hard time in this particular battle, and after Hell and the Hedgerows, it's the only other mission in the campaign where US forces weren't successful, so forcing an enemy surrender with relatively low casualties seems like it might be a pretty good result. Was this because I was trying to play a recon pull game as opposed to a command push one? That's a hard one to call, and while I was constantly looking for areas of weakness to exploit, I'm not sure the game would have panned out differently if I had chosen from the beginning to attack the left flank and swing into Ecausseville from there. Sure, it looks like an opportunity opened up on the left fairly early when the enemy machine guns were suppressed, but I was the one who suppressed them. I didn't find an area of weakness, I made one myself by applying a lot of firepower in exactly the same way I would have done if I had mounted a set-piece push-style attack, by sheer dint of engaging the first enemy contacts that I found. On the flip side though, with 2 enemy positions dominating the centre of the map, it's difficult to see how I could have advanced without knocking out one of them, and I picked the one that, by the time I had to make the decision, was the weaker of the 2. Like I say, this is probably too small a map with too little time and too few potential enemy positions to leave room for much difference in approach, but it definitely made it a little more interesting to play this way rather than going through the formulaic ABCs of a set-piece assault. That's it for this video then, guys. In the next one, we're exploiting forward with Fox Company, who have a self-propelled gun backing them up. Should be interesting. I'll catch you in the next video.